Thank you, Eric. Good morning, everyone. I wanted to take a moment and just say thank you for joining us today. So Ready, Set, Rhody is an initiative that is funded by the EDA, and it is run in partnership by Rhode Island Commerce and the Rhode Island Division of Statewide Planning. So today we have Fuss and O'Neill here to share some findings from the work that they've been doing for the majority of the year. So I will go ahead and let Alex do his introduction and we can get started. But just to reiterate what Eric said, if anyone has any questions at any point in time, please feel free to drop it into the chat or just signal us if you want to go ahead and ask before you forget. So, Alex?
Thanks, Savannah. Let me just get the screen share up. We can get started here. Eric or Silvana, can you just give me a thumbs up that you're seeing that on the screen? Perfect. So we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll just quickly introduce myself. So I'm Alex Maxwell. I'm a planner with the group Fuss and O'Neill, who's been partnered with Rhode Island Commerce and the Division of Statewide Planning on the Ready, Set, Rhody project. It's a real pleasure having all of you here. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to meet with us this morning. Like Eric and Silvana mentioned, if at any point during the presentation portion of the meeting this morning, you have questions or comments or want to register thoughts, please either feel free to chime in via the chat or raise your hand. This doesn't have to be a talking head type of presentation. We do have some dedicated time at the back end for some Q&A, but also make sure we have pause points throughout the presentation portion of the meeting to make sure if folks have thoughts, we can slip them in then as well. But with that, I'll take it away here and just introduce folks a little bit to the project and then what we'll be talking about in more detail as part of this meeting. So Silvana kindly mentioned the Ready, Set, Rhody project is actually funded by a grant by the U.S. Department of Commerce's Economic Development Administration, that's the EDA. And really, the focus of the grant was to fund Commerce to develop a vulnerability assessment or vulnerability assessments, really, and then plans for 12 small business districts throughout Rhode Island, what we're terming as Main Street districts that are really vulnerable to either coastal or inland flooding. And you can kind of see the list of districts here bulleted out on this slide, and you can see that it covers kind of a broad geography in terms of places throughout the state. And really, these districts, while may be considered small business commercial districts, are really representative of areas that have a mixture of both commercial and residential properties. So kind of businesses mixed with residential areas and are really kind of driving not only local but statewide economic growth. I'll just reiterate the point that this project as a whole is also a partnership between Rhode Island Commerce and the Division of Statewide Planning, and we've also been fortunate to have a lot of great participation with municipal partners within each of these districts as well, providing information and input along the way. So next, I'm just going to tell you a little bit of some of the greater context behind this project. So this project really does build upon some past work. In 2019, Division of Statewide Planning published a study on risk reduction for small business resiliency in Rhode Island, which really provided a high-level guidance and some checklists for small businesses to begin to prepare for and respond to climate-related disruptions, inclusive of flooding-related disruptions. So Ready, Set, Rhody kind of picks up where that work left off and really expands upon that initiative by focusing on providing targeted strategies for infrastructure improvements in each of the districts and really recommendations and targeted at reducing or mitigating flood risks in each of the districts, really recognizing that the long-term viability of these Main Street districts depends not only on individual actions that may be taken on the part of business owners, but also collective actions that may require partnerships with local municipalities or collectives of small businesses. So really with that idea in mind and that greater context in mind, we were really tasked with as part of the first part of this project, looking at flooding and really looking at it through two different lenses. So, as you could probably tell from looking at that initial list of the 12 Main Street districts, we have some that fall within more coastal areas and also some that fall within more inland areas. And today's meeting will focus more on the coastal areas to provide some examples there, but. Um, it's worth unpacking both of these to mention that in terms of coastal flooding, we were tasked with not only looking at vulnerabilities as it relates to maybe tidal flooding and increased sea level rise, but also what happens during storm events as well. And the same is true with inland flooding, where we're not just looking at what's happening when you maybe have rivers overflowing, but also what's happening with what we might term as fluvial flooding, are kind of these flash flood events where rainfall events can really overwhelm existing drainage systems in each of the districts. So I'll just kind of quickly unpack some of the inputs to each of those flood types that we're asked to look at as part of this project. So in terms of coastal flooding, I mentioned before, we're really asked to look at not just the tidal flooding or what sometimes more colloquially gets called nuisance or sunny day flooding. So when we have larger tidal flooding events, where are the extents of flooding reaching within each of these districts? And then ultimately, what may be the strategies for addressing near-term tidal flooding? But as part of this, also looking at climate forcings and how tidal flooding can work in conjunction with sea level rise over time, looking at kind of future projected scenarios to increase flooding in an area. And then, of course, when you have kind of the double threat of the tidal flooding coupling with storm surge, where you have coastal storms being blown on shore, that can create even elevated water surface elevations in a district, which cause more extensive flooding. And can be part of the snapshot that you look at when assessing overall vulnerability or flood vulnerability of coastal districts. It's worth just briefly mentioning in terms of inland flooding, in those communities that are included in Ready, Set, Rhody that fall more inland and maybe don't have the tidal influence that the coastal communities have. Really, our focus was on not only looking at the fluvial or riverine flooding, what happens when water bodies, especially rivers, rise and overflow the banks, but also what happens during those extreme rainfall events, which are projected to become increasingly intensive and more frequent with changing climatic conditions. So that's just a brief note and a bit of like kind of flooding 101, if you will, on kind of the different scenarios that we're asked to look at as part of Ready, Set, Rhody. So I'll just pause there to see if there are any questions on anything presented thus far before we get into talking about the kind of overall project approach. All right. I'm not seeing anything, and I got a thumbs up from Eric, so I think we're good to proceed here. So overall, the project is really broken into four different phases or four different tasks. The first of which was really collecting as much of the flood risk information that we could from what's already readily available from both state and federal resources. And then coupling that with data collected from the municipalities specific to each district so we can get a sense for what infrastructure is located where in the district and how it overlaps with some of the flood scenarios. And then ultimately completing that updated district level vulnerability assessment and then coupling with it more district scale and building scale adaptation strategies to kind of paint more of a roadmap for both near and long-term strategies that could be implemented to mitigate against flood risks. So that's just an overview of kind of the sequencing of steps. And we're going to focus mostly today on just unpacking a little bit more behind this very first step of the flood risk mapping tool, and we'll kind of give a little demo there. So before we do that, it's worth mentioning, and I'll pull up the tool on the screen here, but as I hinted at on the previous slide, that very first step of pulling in all of the flood mapping information into one tool really pulled on information provided by both state and federal sources. So in terms of inland flooding conditions, we looked a lot at what was provided by existing FEMA flood mapping, but also longer term projected flooding, inland flooding um, data provided by RIDEM in the form of RIDEM specific layers that add additional water surface elevation on top of what's out there as far as FEMA flood mapping. And then um, as it relates to coastal flooding conditions, really drawing upon the state's storm tools data set, which has models for both current and future projected coastal flooding across all of the districts as well. So I think Eric kindly put in Silvana kindly put in the chat a link to the flood risk mapping tool, which I'm going to pull up here in a second. If you're following along at home and want to click through that link from the chat will work well. It's also provided here on the screen. And if you have your cell phone handy, would rather kind of look at things through your cell phone, the QR code on the screen will also take you to the website that I'm about to flash on the screen. But we'll hop to that, and I can use that to show you a little bit more about the tool. So Eric or Savannah, can you just give me a thumbs up that you are seeing the tool on the screen here? Great. So if you are following along at home and looking at that URL that was provided in the chat, it'll direct you to this landing page here, which originally was intended just to be the page where we included the flood risk mapping tool we're calling the Flood Risk Explorer on this page, but it also kind of became a de facto project website, which included information about Ready, Set, Rhody. If you kind of tab down, it also has information on the different flood scenarios included, kind of what's at risk, what's being considered as part of the Ready, Set, Rhody project. And then if you click the toolbar at the top, it'll take you to the Flood Risk Explorer. And this is the real tool which pulls together all of that information on coastal and inland flooding specific to each of the 12 districts included in the Ready, Set, Rhody project. So I'm just going to give a very brief tutorial. Would certainly encourage folks to follow along while we're walking through it now, but as well, follow along on your own time and follow up if you have questions. But if you are on this page, this Flood Risk Explorer tool, you can see it has an inset map within the project website, which you can certainly use to navigate around. What I like to do is actually use this button in the upper right, which opens up the map in full screen on a separate tab within your web browser, and then allows you to zoom in and out to the different districts included in the Ready, Set, Rhody projects, as well as use the search function up in the upper right where you can actually search for individual addresses. So this would be where you could plug in the individual addresses of businesses within the districts, residential properties, anything that may really fall within the district there. So it has a navigation function. So what I'll do is actually just use one of our districts. I'll use North Kingstown as an example, a coastal example of one of our districts here. And whether you zoom in or search for an address within the district, as you get closer, what you'll start to see is not only some colors start to change with the building footprints, but also a finer grain level of information on elevational data. So these kind of contours, as well as some of the flood information. But very quickly, the screen can become busy. So I'm just going to highlight a few of the functions of the toolbar off here on the left, which will then allow you to better understand how you can use the tool and understand ultimately what you're looking at through the tool. And so as the first part of that, I'll introduce you just quickly to the legend on the toolbar. And this is where you can see what these colors of the building footprints actually translate to in terms of building use or land use type. So within North Kingstown, you can see there's a mixture of different types of commercial, residential, and other buildings located across the district that's outlined here in red. Um, and then what you'll see in the blue is what you could probably imagine is a lot of that flooding information, but right now it's kind of all overlaid on top of one another. So if you're following along with the toolbar on the left, you can actually skip down to the Layers tab, which if you click that open, you can quickly go to the Coastal Flood Layers tab um, and turn that off, which will just allow you to kind of orient yourself with respect to the different buildings that are located within the district. And then it has a little caret function here where you can then begin to turn on and off individual flood risk scenarios. So back on the project website, just above the tool, you can get a sense for what flood data is included in those flood layers here. So for coastal flood conditions, we're really drawing from the storm tool data sets. And what you can see for the present day flooding, what's shown on your screen here is the extent of what's known as the 10% annual exceedance probability flood event, which is a higher probability flood event and showing kind of near-term projected conditions. And what the different gradients of blue represent, if you go back up to your legend, is the different flood depths corresponding with that 10% annual exceedance probability flood event. And so you can see the kind of darker blues represent where it's anticipated to have more flood water, and then as you move up to the lighter gradients of blue, you kind of go down in overall flood depths associated with that condition. And so what you're seeing here is the present day 10% flood event. And then if you go back to your layers tab, you can then look at the conditions as they change when you add 3 feet of sea level rise to that 10% storm. And you can see a lot more if you click back up to your legend is kind of falling in that deeper or darker blue, which represents greater depths of flooding. And then if you zoom out, you'll also see the flood extents begin to expand as well. And that's really helpful for understanding then, perhaps a phased approach to developing strategies targeted at addressing different types of flood risk scenarios in each of the districts, which is kind of that final stage of the Ready, Set, Rhody project. But before I hop back into just talking over some of um, the next steps in the project and kind of providing an overview on those, I just want to pause here for a moment to see if there are any other questions or comments in this very quick tutorial of the Flood Risk Explorer. All right, perfect. Another thumbs up from Eric. So I'll move on. And just before I hop into the slide deck, I do want to mention that this this page that we've linked to here, as I highlighted before, really is our project website, and as such, we have, along with the Flood Risk Explorer, links to additional resources, including the original sources for the flood information that was embedded in the tool, but also other relevant links to partner organizations and other state agencies that provide information germane to flood risks and overall climate vulnerability across the district. So this will also be the area on the project website where we include additional information eventually on proposed strategies for flood mitigation that folks can take a look at, as well as some of that information on the vulnerability assessments. So with that, I'll flip back over to our slide deck. We've gone over the Flood Risk Explorer, and now I'll just kind of quickly step through those other 3 tasks included in the Ready, Set, Rhody project to kind of highlight the other elements of the project that we've been busy working on in coordination with some of the folks I see on this call, but also others in our kind of core project team. The second of which is the municipal survey and data collection step that we took While collecting data on all of the flooding information, we also conducted a survey and distributed it amongst all of the 12 municipalities to bring in information on existing infrastructure, information on things like roads and bridges and buildings located within each of the districts, as well as trying to collect information on past, ongoing, and also planned flood resilience projects within each of the districts, so that when we got to task 4, really looking at development of strategies, our team wasn't necessarily looking at anything that might be duplicative of what's already on the books, so to speak, for kind of key actions and projects in the pipeline that are really aimed at providing flood mitigation. It's important to note that as part of this survey, we collected data, primarily on infrastructure, but also asked to collect information on existing cultural and social institutions, as well as economic data, to really round out a more holistic approach to our vulnerability assessment, where we look not just at the infrastructure vulnerability, but also unique social, cultural, and economic vulnerabilities present in each of the Main Street districts. So we can really ultimately have a very downscaled look at what the overall picture of vulnerability looked like in each of the districts. So that's just a mention of the data collection phase that took a little while to pull in all the information across all the 12 districts, and many thanks to the folks that participated in that survey. But what that all fed into was this vulnerability assessment as part of task 3. As I mentioned at the outset, part of our primary remit was to not just look at development of strategies, but really first, conducting an updated vulnerability assessment for each of these districts that was inclusive of snapshots of the infrastructure vulnerability, but also the social, cultural, and economic vulnerability. And not just looking at present day vulnerabilities, but also future projected vulnerabilities when incorporating some of those longer term flood risk scenarios that you may have seen visually through some of the mapping in that tool. So each of the Main Street districts that were assessed as part of the vulnerability assessment stage really received individual scores, which helped highlight unique areas of exposure when it came to flood risk scenarios, but also where across the built fabric there were maybe unique sensitivities to either different pieces of infrastructure that were more vulnerable over others, or unique sensitivities in terms of economic or social cultural assets in the community that would need to be considered in the development of strategies, even outside of more engineered approaches to flood mitigation measures. And then we also looked at, as part of the formula, if you will, for vulnerability assessments, where was there maybe latent adaptive capacity or already inherent in the communities where certain buildings may carry a greater degree of adaptive capacity over others. A good example of that is, buildings that may not need to adapt by, bringing critical building systems out of a basement or first floor where that had already happened by nature of the construction of the building, or similarly where maybe good communication systems are already in place to notify folks that may be more vulnerable to flooding in the event of a coastal flooding event, when to get out, and also similarly when to come back into the districts. So I won't get into. I know this slide has a lot of words and a lot of numbers on the screen here, but I flash it on the screen here to show you an example of just kind of how all of that information eventually gets translated into a quantitative framework that we can use to begin to score and foreground unique vulnerabilities within each of the districts. So, we're able to pull in information on the location of different public utilities, where commercial buildings, were located in relation to some of the flood risk scenarios, as well as, information on roads, bridges, RIPTA bus stops, and really assign specific scores so we can begin to highlight where the quote unquote hotspots are in each of the communities, which then can help focus, where you target unique flood mitigation strategies. So that's a little bit more on the kind of background on task three. And then I'll just round out by saying what this is all then building up to is the development of a unique list of adaptation strategies specific to each of the districts. What's shown by way of a quick snapshot here on the screen is those strategies that might be targeted at unique building types that are present in each of the districts. But as part of our remit, we're also looking at more district-wide or neighborhood scale strategies in both the near and long term for unique actions that could be taken to address unique flood risks that are inherent in each of the communities. And these can range from, looking at areas where you may want to take more of a neighborhood wide action and incorporation of berms or potential adaptation strategies to existing flood walls, but also looking at areas where through more of a nature-based approach, you might allow for open spaces that already exist along the coastline in some of these districts to serve more of that function of acting as a sponge for some of the coastal flooding. So we're kind of looking at the range of different adaptation strategies in each of these districts, catering the list of strategies per district accordingly. So with that, I'll kind of close the presentation portion of the meeting here today by just saying I know we are actually at the upcoming event. This is the Thursday morning workshop here, but I have on the screen as well that link and QR code which directs you to the project website. I know Silvana, who you met at the outset of the meeting here, also kindly provided her contact information, and she serves as a really good point of contact for questions or comments related to the project.